Well met by moonlight, dear ones. I'm Curiosity, and this is my Jamboree. A firelit gathering for explorers of the uncanny, the frightening, and the hard to explain. Tonight, we spin tales of strange huts in the woods, and spooky door-to-door salesmen, and one that could only be pieced together after the fact. So settle in by the crackling fire, lean in close, take a sip of good strong coffee, and let's begin. Our first story is from an anonymous viewer. 4 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school. I hadn't yet gotten my license, and this is right around the time I started to partake. Me and one of my friends in the neighborhood, let's call him Kurt, knew of a creek about 1.5 miles from my house, which would be a nice smoke spot. But it was a bit of a hike to get there. It was well known that there were a few scattered structures in the woods here, such as a concrete hut, an old barrel fire pit, and a platform built into the trees, all within a few dozen feet of each other. This is all about 1/4 mile into the woods, and about 1/2 mile from any roads. We'd been here during the daytime dozens of times before, usually with a few more friends. We lived in a nice suburban neighborhood, so it didn't seem dangerous to us. Not to mention, nobody else had ever been spotted there before. It had become a pretty common spot for kids our age. We all just assumed that it was an old, abandoned, homeless structure. But there were still legends passed around by other high schoolers making claims of something sinister. Hooks for hands, serial murderers, inbred cannibals. Typical campfire stories. The concrete hut itself was about 7 by 7 by 5 feet, and the ground had been dug out on the inside, making the ceiling even taller. We'd found improvised weapons, food cans, trash, and so on when we first discovered it about 2 years earlier, but nothing of that nature since. Just beer cans, roaches, and cigarette butts scattered around the fire pit from neighborhood kids. The inside was scribbled with Sharpie. The top was covered with a tarp, and the whole thing smelled terrible, so none of us dared to enter. Like I said before, there was also a lookout platform built into a tree about 50 feet away. An improvised ladder made of branches led to the 5 by 5 platform about 20 feet off the ground. The wood was clearly water damaged, so I never actually wanted to go up there. Back on track, this particular October evening, Kurt and I left at about 6 p.m, hoping to get there before dark. We had several other smoke spots that were closer to my house, but nothing quite matched the excitement and mystique of the hut. We make our way through the neighborhood, through some backyards, into a field, and we finally pass through the tree line. Stones laid out across the creek allowed us to cross without getting wet. Right around the time we got there, the sun was almost fully set, and no light was coming through the trees. This was the first time either of us had been there at night. We hiked the last 500 feet uphill, and we could just barely see the hut through the darkness. The atmosphere had us both uneasy, and we talked with the quietest whisper possible. We didn't want to approach the structure, so we decided to smoke about 50 feet from the hut, right on the edge of the bluff we just climbed. I decided to shift a few feet over to more even footing before we started, and I felt my foot snag on a fishing line running about a foot off the ground tied to the tree next to me. A loud clang was made as the line yanked an empty metal bucket into a metal scrap planted in the ground, almost like a makeshift alarm. We hear someone moving down from the platform in the tree about 20 feet away from us and drop into the leaves below. We take off down the bluff, sliding on our asses and hitting trees. We still hear scurrying and grunting behind us. We get to the bottom and sprint through the creek. I trip on the loose rocks below me and fall into the freezing cold water before bolting up and continuing to run. About a second later, we hear splashes behind us. At this point, we clear the tree line and are in a 1/4 mile of open field. We sprint as fast as we can away. Kurt and I are hurt, out of breath, and the person is clearly catching up. We can hear them right behind us, breathing heavily, and their loud footsteps growing closer and closer. We sprint through someone's backyard, and we hear their dog start barking. We finally run into the middle of the street, and a car slams on their brakes. Kurt and I screech to a halt to avoid the car. We turn around to see somebody standing just outside of the floodlights of a nearby house, before they turn around and run back towards the forest. We apologized to the driver, ditched what we'd been smoking, and I called my sister to come pick us up. We explained to her what had happened, begged her not to tell my parents, and we never returned to that creek again. Anonymous, it sounds like that was someone's house after all. Good thing they didn't catch up to you, but you do have to wonder, why chase you all that way? Our next story is from Chrissy510. shared on r/creepy encounters. A few years back, I was living with my aunt and uncle after moving to a new state. They just moved into a new home in a new sub-development. In this area, door-to-door salesmen swarm new developments and new builds for water softeners, cleaning supplies, solar panels, generators, and the Kirby vacuum people. They wander the neighborhood all day, knocking on doors, but were usually gone by around 5 p.m. This particular evening I was home alone with my dog, a mutt who was mostly black lab and an unknown mixture. He was roughly the size and weight of a full-breed Labrador, but he had a stockier build and long wiry hair. He was a gentle, sweet baby who was upset if someone spoke harshly to him. I'd never known him to be threatening to anyone. My aunt and uncle were out celebrating their anniversary. This time of year the days were getting longer and we would have full dark by around 8 p.m. It was about 7 p.m. and starting to get dusky when someone rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. The door was one of those with a thick glass oval window, and I could see the door and who was there from the kitchen. I was going to ignore them, but unfortunately they could see me and continued to knock. So I went to answer the door. My dog followed me, but stood off to the side in the shadows of the dining room. The person at the door was a young man, about college age, dressed in a collared shirt and tie and khakis. Looked a bit like a Mormon missionary with style. He was thin and about 5'8", 5'9". I figured he was a salesman of some sort, but thought it was odd he was out this late in the day. I opened the door a few inches to speak through, and he starts his spiel about Kirby vacuum cleaners, and he wants to come in and give a demo. It's not my house. I know once they get in they aren't leaving without selling something, and I have no need for an overpriced vacuum. I don't have $1,000 or more to spend anyway. I tell him, no thank you, I'm not interested, and begin to close the door, when he puts his foot between the door and the door jamb, and throws his hands up to stop the door from closing. This is when I think, what the hell? And I hear a vicious growling behind me to my right, and then a loud, deep, repeated bark, as my dog lunges for the door. I grab his collar to keep him from going out the door. The guy's mouth drops open. His eyes get really wide, and he looks like he's ready to pass out or pee himself as he jumps back from the door and backs away, saying, I'm sorry, wrong house, and then turns and runs to the end of the driveway, where a car with 3 men in it pulls up to get him, and they speed off, tires squealing. I told my aunt and uncle about it when they got home, and we told a few neighbors so they could keep an eye out for unusual behavior. It's possible they were a team of Kirby salesmen. They do travel in teams of 4 and follow the door knockers in the car with the vacuum. But I was suspicious, because it was late in the day for them to be knocking on doors, and it was a team of 4 men. Usually they have a team with 2 or more women in the group, because they're knocking on doors at a time of day when women are going to be home alone and unlikely to let strange men in. So, a team of Kirby salesmen working late to meet quotas? Or a team of home invaders? I don't know, but Cosmo wasn't going to take chances. I'm so glad you had Cosmo with you. I've never met a Kirby salesperson before, but I can't imagine they'd be trained to put their foot in the door, especially coming later than they normally would. Good riddance. Our last story was posted by Significant Swan 159. This happened 5 years ago, and I'm only posting now because I want to warn others. This is quite difficult to talk about, for reasons that will become clear. In 2017, I went to a friend's birthday party. It was their 40th, so it was a pretty big deal. I'd recently lost my job, and I was struggling with my mental health, but I had a very supportive husband and a good family life. And it was a private party. What could go wrong? My husband was supposed to go with me, but our childcare arrangements fell through at the last moment. I didn't want to go without my husband, but he felt I needed a night out with friends, and the birthday girl kept asking if I was coming, so I went. It was a private party, and everyone there had been invited by the birthday girl. There were half a dozen people I knew really well. Everyone else was a stranger, but I assumed that the birthday girl had good judgment, and everybody present was okay. We were all having a great time, laughing and dancing. At one point I stepped outside to cool down and smoke a cigarette. A fellow partygoer, male, joined me. We talked about the birthday girl, how we knew her. We talked about football. It turned out we were from the same city and supported the same team. We returned to the party and he asked me if I wanted a drink. I said no, and raised my glass to show him I already had one. I then put my drink down and went to dance with the birthday girl. When I returned from the dance floor, I took a big gulp of my drink, and after that, it all gets a little hazy. The rest of this story is pieced together from various sources and photos. There is a photo of the male party guest and me, let's call him MPG, with the venue's door staff. I'm smiling at the camera with my arm around the security man, and the MPG next to me, kissing my cheek. I don't remember this. There is a photo of me and MPG. I'm leaning against him with my eyes closed. I don't remember this. I woke up the next morning at home on the sofa. My husband was initially furious about the state I came home in, but he didn't know how bad it could have been. Apparently, several friends saw the MPG trying to guide me into a waiting car, and stopped him. When they challenged him, he said I'd agreed to leave with him, but I was incoherent at this point. I have no recollection of this, by the way. A female friend, N, took me home. I don't remember this either, but I know my friend saved me from something horrible. Once my husband knew what had happened, he was very supportive and concerned. N told my husband how quickly my behavior had changed and how quickly I'd become uncoordinated and incoherent. This all took place 5 years ago. I saw the birthday girl recently and she told me that MPG is currently in prison for assaulting his girlfriend in 2020. So please remember, always be careful with your drink. Never leave it unattended. Watch out for your friends and make sure they're watching out for you. The sun is rising, and just for a moment banishing the horrors of the world. The jamboree is at an end once more. My thanks to everyone who sent in stories or gave me permission to narrate theirs. Remember, I upload new stories on Mondays and Fridays, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss out. If you have any thoughts about the stories I've narrated, why not leave them in the comments below? And don't forget, if you enjoyed your time by the fireside, to share a handful of granola with the like button. If you'd like a story of yours narrated, I have a submission form linked in the description, and I would love to learn more about your curious experiences and unexplained happenings. I will see you soon, dear ones, and until then, may your nights be dark and your dreams just a little curious.